Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Merry Christmas to all. Happy we can say that now. Merry Christmas and welcome back to the DMZ. Our last show before.
It might be against the law, Matt, but it is Hanukkah too. Hanukkah is coming up. I realize it might be politically incorrect to say these days, but I'm sure someone out there still is Jewish in Trump's America, and we should say also Happy Hanukkah.
I got a memo though from President-elect Trump's team advising me that Happy Holidays is what terrorists say. So I'm gonna have to stick. I'm gonna have to stick with what I said. But whatever your thing is, that's cool. Good. Happy Chris holidays. Yeah.
Well, that's very magnanimous of you.
So today's our I don't know I don't know if we're going to do a show next week or how we're going to do it, but this is maybe our year-end extravaganza.
And what a year!
What a year! It's such a good year, and it's such an amazing time of year. I even have a Starbucks cup that has all sorts of holiday cheer on it.
So if you go through all the years of modern history, which years were worse? I guess the year when Hitler came to power, that would be worse.
1933, elected Chancellor of Germany.
Right.
The late 20s and early and 30s were pretty bad, I'm guessing.
Okay.
Overall,
I'll say those are worse. All right.
Yeah.
What else might be worse? I don't know. That might be it.
Yeah. I'm sure, like the 70s were no piece of cake. No picnic either. I'm guessing.
I mean, obviously, they're individual bad things. Obviously, slavery is worse than what's going on today, but that extended over many, many years, so I can't concentrate that into a single year of badness.
Well, I agree it's been a bad year, but there is a hope of a new year, and Donald Trump may fix all these things. So it may be that this is the nadir, and that we are entering into a more joyful new year in the future.
We've sometimes in past shows we've talked about things we've gotten right and wrong, and I think we all know what I got wrong this year. That's been well documented.
For those who are not regular viewers, not to belabor the point, but before the election, Bill and I made our predictions, and we were both wrong. We both thought Hillary was going to win. One of us was a little more wrong than the other about the extent of that. And I was
I had the infamous piece where I said it was going to be Hillary versus Jeb, and obviously I was comfortable Hillary was going to win throughout the year, as many others were, but I think I got something fundamentally wrong. Although in some defense of mine, not quite as wrong as you might think, based on what the actual raw numbers were on election day, but that
in terms of if you look at the national polls versus the popular vote, it's not that far off.
Right. But I thought that the establishment would win the day, that the seeds for a populist revolt weren't really there. Obviously, there was discontentment that you could see that, but the economy was moving at a good enough clip, and there weren't any massive foreign policy crises out there to create a circumstance of true upheaval. And Andrew Sullivan had a piece earlier that we talked about once about how you do get these upheavals not at the nadir of an economic collapse, but at during the period of digging out, when the recovery is not happening fast enough. That is when these types of upheavals happen, and you could argue that both sides of that coin are true. On one hand, Hillary got the most votes, so there are more people in America than not that did not want to see this sort of upheaval. But obviously there were enough people that did, to make it happen. So that's a big thing that I got wrong. But there are a couple things that I got relatively right, or at least was onto something that I wasn't brilliant enough to carry to its conclusion. But there are a couple pieces that I had during the general election.
A lot of people got a lot of things wrong this year.
Yes, I'm not alone. Still, it still hurts. You want to be right. It's fun to be right. It's professionally helpful to be right. But before the convention, I had a pre-convention piece about how even that it looks like Hillary's going to have a very well-scripted convention, which was true at the end. I mean, he got off to a rocky start, but by the end, people thought, wow, that was a really gangbusters convention. But I said even gangbusters conventions can mask underlying divisions that remain. They don't necessarily actually heal the rifts. And you can look at, Al Gore's convention was very strong. Bill Clinton's convention was extraordinarily strong. But Clinton had seeds of dissension. Jerry Brown was running around refusing to endorse the candidate and talking about the platform being a sellout. Whereas Bernie was at least blessing the platform, which Jerry Brown wasn't doing. And even though Bill Clinton had this huge bounce that came out of the convention, in part because Perot dropped out and tacitly endorsed the candidate, which he then reneged on and jumped back in, Bill Clinton landed with 43% of the vote. So a lot of Democrats did vote for Perot. So the underlying tensions in the Democratic Party, with the Songest Democrats and the Brown Democrats not thrilled about Bill Clinton, that remained. And Ralph Nader was needling Gore in the summer of 2000, and even though Gore had a strong convention and his poll numbers came up and up and up throughout the fall, there was just enough discontent. It wasn't a lot, but just enough to upend the election. So that's the same thing with Clinton here. By and large, the party was unified, but there was just enough softness in the states that counted to deny her the win, even though she had the most votes. So that was something that I was keyed in on. It was a Politico piece. I think it was called "Can the Dems Truly Unify?"
One of the things that one of the many pieces of conventional wisdom that turned out not to be true was this: that there are only a few moments in a campaign, in a presidential campaign, where people have to pay attention, and so it's when you pick your running mate, it's a governing pick, it's the conventions, and it's the debates. And I think it's safe to say Hillary Clinton won the conventions. Her convention was much better than Trump's. And I think, most people would say she won at least 2 of the 3 debates.
Well, polling-wise, she won all 3.
Yeah, I think I thought Trump won. I said Trump won the one that came on the heels of the Access Hollywood story, and basically because he survived it and transcended that story. But anyway, but the point being, if you're sort of adding up stuff like she won the conventions, she won the debates, she's got the better ground game. You throw in all those things, and it's understandable why people thought that she was going to win. But all of that went out the window.
Well, you mentioned vice presidential pick before. One thing else that you might say I got right was that you should have picked Al Franken. That you wanted to have somebody who could navigate the circus-like atmosphere of the election, and get in Trump's head more. Plus, and I said this in the piece, if Trump was going to win, it was going to be because he was going to run the table in the upper Midwest. And as far as what Democratic options were available, Franken was the best of the lot. Either he, Sherrod Brown was one people were looking at, but he would have cost you a Senate seat, and Franken would not have. And your other choices there were women. And there was an argument you could make that you didn't need a double women ticket. You needed to do something to help with white men, because that's where Trump was going to be. That's what Trump was going to pursue. Franken could have done that for you.
All right, I agree with you about the part about, look, if you had the game to play over again, you wouldn't pick Kaine because it didn't work out with Kaine. But So I agree with you that maybe the better option would have been taking your advice and going with Franken, and then maybe having him sort of mock and troll Trump and Pence the whole way, and have him basically play the role of attack dog. The part I'm not so sure about is that he would have resonated any better, say, in the Rust Belt and in places like Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania. Joe Biden, maybe? But what? So, in other words, sometimes people don't play well. A prophet's not accepted in his own hometown. I mean, Al Gore didn't win Tennessee, for example. I'm not convinced that Al Franken would have been able to deliver that part of the country.
Well, obviously you can't say anything definitively, and the one narrative of Franken is that he's a Hollywood liberal, and if that's the narrative, then yeah, maybe not. But at minimum, he did it in Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota is, was a state that Clinton barely won. It's sort of analogous to Wisconsin. So you have a similar type of voter there that definitely swung Trump's way. And Franken at least has the experience of communicating with those voters. And he won his first race by a literal hair after a recount, but won going away in 2014, which was a Republican year, and a lot of Democrats, Colorado, for example, Iowa, did fall. So he at least would be going into the mission knowing what the challenge was and having gone through it before. He's not, he doesn't have the lunch pail feel that maybe a Joe Biden has, but at least is hailing from the area and knows what that kind of voter is like. But obviously that's all in the past. Democrats have to decide where to go from here. But I know we were talking before the show. The whole notion of how Democrats appeal to the white working class or people of color, that's kind of been talked to death. So we don't actually have to relitigate that here.
Yes. Before we get into that, it does occur to me that that one person that's had a good 2016 is my friend and boss Tucker Carlson, who launched his show on Fox News, and it's going great. And I don't know if you saw this the Kurt Eichenwald interview, which was I would say must see TV.
I've not seen it,
but you should check this show out, Bill. It's in fact we'll have to try to get you on there sometime to spar with him. But it's
So I should not say something bad about Tucker Carlson right now. Is what you're getting at. I should keep my mouth.
No, I think you should. I think you should attack him. That'll make it more likely that you get on.
What was the subject? I know Eichenwald has been a major Trump critic in the past several weeks.
So Eichenwald sent a tweet alleging that in 1990 Donald Trump was institutionalized. And it became bizarre. He went on Tucker Carlson's Fox show, and Tucker challenged him to prove that. And Eichenwald said something really interesting that I wrote about, which was, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, obviously this was me writing about process, but I didn't write it. So that raised the question for me is I feel like Twitter is where journalists expose their bias. And it raised the question, should the standard or the criteria for allegations you levy on Twitter be lower than it is for what you would write in a column or a news story? Now, the reason that I thought about this is, I've not seen this yet, but Oliver Darcy just tweeted out that on Good Morning America, Kurt Eichenwald said that his Trump mental hospital tweet was part of his series of jokes and intended to be, quote, signal to a source to talk with him. I have to watch that. But Eichenwald went on Tucker's show, and when Tucker started asking him about these tweets that he sent, including the one where he alleged without any evidence that Trump had been institutionalized in 1990, Eichenwald held up a 3-ring binder book and it had like on the cover it said something like Tucker Carlson's wrong allegations. I forget. Basically, he was suggesting that if Tucker wanted to play that game, he had a binder full of like things to push back that Tucker had gotten wrong or alleged. It's unclear to me whether or not he actually had anything in that binder or whether it was just. And by the way, not to change the subject, but that reminds me of something really smart that I heard. Was it Gary Kasparov? Is that the guy's name? The famed chess player?
Yep.
He said people say that Vladimir Putin is playing chess while Obama's playing checkers. And Kasparov said no, he's not playing chess, he's playing poker. That he's got a weak hand and he's always bluffing. I don't know if he was bluffing or not, or if he actually had a binder full of Tucker Carlson quotes that he could have unleashed. But anyway, I bring it up partly because partly because I just saw a tweet about it, but also because it turned out to be like people were saying it was like the weirdest cable episode that they've seen or cable interview that they've ever seen, and it got a lot of buzz. But for me, it really raised this question about Twitter and should the criteria for what you tweet be the standard, especially when it comes to making an allegation. Should it be different than something you would write? Of course, this came on the heels of the Julia Yaffe tweet, where she said something about Donald Trump. It's either being nepotism or him effing his daughter.
This is a reaction to a story about her having an East Wing office.
Right. And so these are both, kind of respected mainstream journalists.
So she
saying things in Twitter.
She actually lost a contract with Politico, although I was a little confused. She was already planning to move to the Atlantic, and she didn't lose her job at the Atlantic. So it seemed like something that was already in the works was being accelerated. And Politico had another situation where an editor suggested he was going to bring a baseball bat to one of the alt-right leaders who lived near him. He's saying that on Facebook, and then he got terminated at Politico for that. So I mean, Politico is definitely setting a standard for
they
writers.
Put out a scathing statement about Yaffe's tweet, but it is interesting. I mean, and I'm sure part of the story here is that Donald Trump has unleashed this. I think part of the story is that Twitter that Twitter actually is doing a service by exposing biases of journalists, things that they would never print or that would never get through editing. They're telling us what they believe. But I think Trump is also making people unhinged as well right now. But
I think there's two things right there. One is sort of the media ethics question, and I would argue that you could make an argument either way that your Twitter account or your Facebook account is an extension of your professional work, and you should adhere to similar standards with it, or you can argue this is when I'm off the clock, and I can say what I want to say. And I think both arguments have merit. It's the job of the employer to set guidelines for their staff and say, here's what we expect of you, we expect of our staff, and then act accordingly.
And then sometimes they're mixed messages, right? People say, hey, we want you to be on this platform, and we want you to be intimate, and we want you to like have a voice and develop a following, and then but also play it safe and don't do anything stupid.
Right. So you just have to decide what your strategy is and what you're comfortable with. But I think clearly it has been good for journalists to be provocative on Twitter and build up individual followings that will then be reading their long form work. So I would probably lean toward, if I was the media boss here, I would lean towards that strategy and not worry about the charges of bias.
But but Bill, and I mean, I totally hear where you're coming from. But the other factor in this is the American public dislikes the media. There is a sense that the media is liberally biased, and when you have ostensibly straight news reporters from ostensibly mainstream publications saying things like this, I think collectively it does hurt that image of the media as being like a trusted source that's not going that doesn't just disdain the Republican standard bearer and the president-elect.
But you could have a complete sea change in the media where everyone is straight as a line. It's just nothing but fact-checking. There's no trace of opinion whatsoever. And you are still going to get hammered as perpetrating fake news and being a tool of somebody. There's just no way around that. So I don't think there is any way to avoid those kinds of charges. And I think the best you can do is be who you are and be transparent. I mean, obviously you should traffic in facts. But I think we got to get beyond this notion that it's just conservatives charging me with liberal bias. I mean, you had Glenn Greenwald, after the Washington Post wrote about the intelligence community concluding that Russia was actively trying to elect Trump, not just undermine democracy generically. Greenwald writes a piece saying, this is horrible reporting by the Washington Post. This is classic bad journalism. And the premise of Greenwald's argument was they relied on unnamed CIA operatives, and the CIA are proven liars. As if that statement was somehow an act of journalism on Greenwald's part and not just a sloppy knee-jerk opinion. But that's what you have that level of distrust in elements on both the left and the right. And I don't think there's anything you're going to do to, put that Humpty Dumpty back together again. I think that's just going to be there. But again, if you were a journalistic outfit, you want to tell your reporters, you got to be super clean on Twitter and not display any personal opinion whatsoever. That's a fine way to do it.
But I think, but I also think that there's a difference between, you can be personal and provocative and yet not accuse the president-elect of not make an allegation that he was institutionalized or on drugs that you cannot source or corroborate, and not suggest that maybe he's having sexual intercourse with his daughter and use the F word on Twitter. Like it's not like you either let me do whatever I totally want or you're going to censor me. Like, there is a happy medium where you can be, somewhat provocative and interesting and yet not cross that line. And we're seeing time and time again this line being crossed. And by the way, slightly related story, because it has to do with what I would now call the Trump derangement syndrome. Keith Olbermann, in a video produced by GQ magazine, says we can delegitimize Trump by not calling him President Trump. There was an MTV video that was on Twitter this week making the rounds that was like New Year's resolution for white people, or for white guys, for white men. My point being that whether it's MTV or GQ magazine or Eichenwald, I think, is at Time. Yaffe was at Politico magazine, is going to the Atlantic. These are, we all know that they're left-leaning, but they're ostensibly mainstream outlets, and they're basically proving everything that Trump voters thought they knew about the media to be true.
Well, I think there's a jump there. I mean, GQ and MTV News is not the New York Times and the Washington Post. Right. And, nor is it the mindset of every Democratic voter in the country. And I haven't seen either of those videos, so I can't comment on what they were specifically saying. But to get back to what you were talking about Eichenwald and pushing this notion of, Trump possibly being institutionalized at some point, which I assume is not based in any kind of fact. I don't want to be a rumor monger myself. I do think there is a danger for the left to share the craziest possible things that they come across without checking it out for themselves, because there's going to be Trump derangement syndrome. There was Bush derangement syndrome, there was Obama derangement syndrome. There's still going to be Trump derangement syndrome because this is a very deranged time. There's lots of things that are going to happen that are actually true and are actually horrible, and therefore it's going to trigger people to panic, justifiably. But if, because you are panicked, and that encourages you to share things that are not true or not proven,
that normalizes Trump.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You're setting a low bar for him to clear. Oh, you mean he's not institutionalized? Well, I guess he's A-okay.
It also muddies the water. It muddies the water. Everybody's engaged in is hyperventilating. Everybody engages in ad hominem attacks. Everybody engages in allegations that may or may not be true. Trump says maybe Ted Cruz's dad was part of the JFK plot. Time magazine says maybe Donald Trump was institutionalized. Hey man, it's your truth. I'm not sure. Maybe they're all true. Maybe none of it's true. It's like, they are helping play into and attempting to delegitimize Trump by refusing to call him, president or president-elect, which he is in fact. And if we're going to respect the office, like they maybe unintentionally playing into this post-truth, world.
And that's not just Trump's game. That's Russia's game.
That's part of the disinformation. Absolutely.
You saw on the floor of the United Nations after the genocide's happening in Aleppo, Samantha Power, our UN ambassador, chastising the Russians, saying, "Have you no shame? Is there any part of this of children being executed that doesn't creep you out just a little?" And the Russian ambassador's response was, "Don't act like your Mother Teresa." They've been pushing this whole. This goes back to Putin's op-eds in the New York Times, where basically says, "Hey, you Americans do all these horrible things. Why are you wagging your finger at us?" As if it's all moral equivalence. And obviously the big difference is that America is at least based on high ideals, which plenty of times are not adhered to, but the tension between American ideals and actions is constant and generally keeps America on the right track. If America goes wayward with the Iraq invasion, the public catches on and throws those people out and puts in people that do things differently. That kind of thing does not happen in Russia. Russia's not saying we have high ideals. Russia's saying we're all bastards here, so stop complaining. That's what they want to get us at, where we don't hold them to any kind of accountability standards anymore. And Trump is very likely to abet them in that goal. We don't have to fall into the trap and abandon all sense of decency and standards ourselves.
Yes, I think that's true. Maybe that's a good New Year's resolution for us, Bill, here in the DMZ, that we are not going to be dragged down, and we are not going to take that bait, because then the terrorists win.
There you go. So there's a piece that I wrote over at ourfuture.org, which probably won't get much attention because I'm not an official data journalist. I'm not Nate Silver or Nate Cohn. People don't come to me to number crunch.
Contraire. You're my first phone call in times of crisis.
Thank you, sir. And what I did over there, I don't think is terribly innovative. I don't believe someone else has done it. I could be mistaken. I can't read everything. But I went through the numbers that have been crunched by Dave Wasserman, who is at 538 and Political Report. He keeps a Google Doc.
Had a nice, hey, not going to drop names here, but had a nice chat with him. Met him for the first time at a little Christmas, a little elite journalistic Inside the Beltway Christmas party this weekend.
Very nice.
Shared an eggnog with him. Nice guy. So anyway.
So he has the most up-to-date raw numbers. I think the Federal Election Commission will have their numbers soon, so maybe there'll be minor differences. And I also looked at electproject.org, which does the turnout estimates, and they have the turnout numbers going back years and years. Not just the turnout, but turnout percentage based on the eligible voter population. So some people have noted that Hillary got as many votes as Obama did, just about, and Trump got more than Romney did. But the one thing that I haven't seen people do is talk about that in terms of how much the voter population grew in the past 4 years. The eligible voter population is 4.08% bigger than it was 4 years ago. So when you're looking at raw vote numbers, you can look at percentage numbers, and that can be a little confusing because the third parties did better than the last time, so that kind of warps the numbers a little bit. They had more attention, and they got a bigger vote. That kind of squeezes the percentages of Trump and Clinton. And I think you can actually discount that third-party vote in assessing Trump and Clinton because in the exit poll, it was asked in a two-person race, who would you vote for? And 5% of voters said, I wouldn't vote, which is about the number of people that voted for third parties. So I think the obvious conclusion is not that they tipped the vote one way or the other. They were just kind of a non-factor that they just wouldn't be there if Stein and Johnson didn't get media attention. So you can look at the Trump and Clinton numbers relative to Obama and Romney, I think, as a fair metric, a fair baseline as to how well they did compared to 4 years ago. But you got to do it in terms of the size of the voter population, how much that's grown. So if you did better than 4%, then you truly outperformed Obama or Romney. If you did worse than 4%, even if you nominally had more votes, you actually did worse than Obama and Romney. So Clinton, I think it's 70,000 votes less than Obama. That is worse than Obama, not just marginally, but it's 4% less, 4 percentage points less than 4 years ago. Trump did better than Romney, but he got 3.3% better. So it's actually a slight drop-off, nationally speaking. Now you can go on a state-by-state basis, and the numbers there are actually somewhat uneven. Generally speaking, Trump did better than Romney, better than 4% in the northern swing states. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina's escaping me. I think he was about 4% North Carolina. He was much better than 4% in the other states, and he was like 10% in Florida. Clinton had huge drop-offs, bigger. Trump won over 1 million. Trump won about 700,000 more votes in the northern states that he flipped, and Clinton lost over 1 million. So, Clinton's drop was bigger than Trump's gain. So there's a couple wrinkles here. One is Wisconsin. Trump did not do better than Romney in Wisconsin, but Clinton did markedly worse than Obama in Wisconsin. Clinton did better than Obama in Florida. 6% better than Obama in Florida. Romney just did 10% better in Florida. And then when you get outside of the swing states, Clinton did better than Obama in Arizona and Georgia and Texas. And what's particularly interesting there is the overall turnout was better in those states than 4 years ago, which is not the case in some of those northern states. The turnout was actually down, largely because Hillary vote dropped so precipitously. So I think there's a net analysis to be made that Trump was able to pull out some Democrat converts and some new vote, while there was Democratic drop-off in these northern, mostly Rust Belt states. But in the more diverse states, Florida included, even though all states, Florida, Arizona, Georgia, Texas, she did better. And Texas is kind of the big enchilada here because that's 38 electoral votes. If Texas flipped just in this election, Clinton would have won the Electoral College. There was she had a double-digit improvement over Obama. It was a 9-point state between Trump and Clinton, a slightly smaller margin than Iowa. And if you think you can't make up 9 points in 4 years, well, that's exactly what Trump did in Michigan and Iowa, and maybe one others escaped me. So I'm not saying it's a gimme,
right?
But the winds are in the right direction for her.
Let me tie this into the last conversation. You're talking about, you just talked about the Electoral College. I was talking about mainstream media outlets sort of demonstrating their bias and the Trump derangement syndrome. The New York Times today, as we record this, has an editorial, not an op-ed, but an editorial condemning the Electoral College. And they say, quote, "It is a living symbol of America's original sin." They're tying it to slavery. And they're trying to abolish the Electoral College. An issue they didn't seem that concerned about, a month ago. But now, with the electoral vote yesterday going to Trump. So, I mean, this ties into what you were saying, obviously, because Hillary ended up winning the popular vote. And she, it came down to, getting to 270. And here you have the New York Times sort of coincidentally now wanting to get rid of the Electoral College.
Well, and you're seeing this a lot on the left right now. Look, we've had 7 elections in a row. Democrats have won the popular vote in 6 of them, but won the presidency in 4. So there's something that's a little out of whack here. And what I think people don't fully grasp, historically speaking, is the founders created the Electoral College precisely so we would not have direct democracy.
Right. Yes.
We would have the ability for more engaged and informed people to make that final decision.
That's part of it.
And and there's also the question of small states versus big states. So the big states wouldn't run roughshod over the small states, and that's part of not having a tyranny of the majority.
Yeah.
And along with that were the House and the Senate. Initially, the House being the closest thing to direct democracy we would have, the Senate being appointed by state legislatures. So you have, and then a judiciary that's appointed for life. So you have all these different ways that people gain power coming together to create a check and balance system where no faction could run roughshod over another faction. I mean, that's the idea. And you can say over the course of the last 200 years, that has generally worked out. Obviously, not every single election works perfectly, and the country has problems. But generally speaking, the different factions of the country have had to work together. And that sometimes means gridlock, but that's sort of where the system errs toward. Better to have gridlock than to run roughshod over a faction. What you have right now is a very anomalous situation where a minority of the country has gained almost total power in every branch of government. That's not what the system normally produces. And that's just an example of how no system is ever 100% efficient or 100% perfect in realizing its goal. But as it stands, the system is not working the way the founders originally intended. You now have the Republicans, a very conservative aspect of the Republicans, with almost total control. The only thing saving it from complete control is the filibuster power, which is not even in the Constitution. Republicans could even take away if they wanted to, and the whims of Anthony Kennedy for as long as he sticks around. That's it. So you can understand why Democrats might say maybe the system needs to change at this point.
But I would say 2 things. One, I would say 8 years ago, Democrats had the presidency and the House, and they made decisions to push certain agendas and to make certain public policy decisions that I think sowed the seeds for a backlash that we're now experiencing. The other thing I would say is, in defense of the Electoral College system, I don't know if I think, by the way, I think you described it very accurately and very fairly in the founders' intent. But there's another benefit that I don't know if it was their intent, but it's an underrated benefit, which is this. If we had one man, one vote and a national popular vote, if something went wrong, there was a voter fraud or a problem with balloting, you would have a national problem where there would have to be like a national recount, a national let's try again. Part of what the Electoral College does, whether by design or just by accident, is help isolate the problem. So, for example, in 2000, we had the Florida recount. We were to isolate it to Florida, and whoever won Florida would then become the president. So that is maybe also an underrated argument for having the Electoral College.
Well, we're not even totally immune from that currently. 1876 was the Rutherford B. Hayes election. Very close election. Rutherford B. Hayes won the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote. But he won the Electoral College by one electoral vote. And both sides charged the other with voter fraud. There was one Republican elector in Oregon that had to step down because he was a federal government employee and he wasn't allowed to be an elector. But the governor of Oregon was a Democrat, and then he appointed a Democrat to replace the Republican, flipping the entire Electoral College, which made Republicans go ballistic. And the only way they solved that problem was by Congress created an ad hoc electoral commission, something that's not even in the Constitution, to negotiate a solution. And they agreed to restore the Republican elector in exchange for Republicans pulling out the last troops in the southern states for Reconstruction. So you can have big giant problems in any system. I mean, I agree that if you had a popular vote that was a 500 vote difference, you'd have recounts galore and things would get crazy. I don't dispute that.
Yeah, and then you could be like, well, we need to go find some more votes in California or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's
so I guess my point being
there's no fail-safe system.
Yeah.
But
I do think it's look, and you could certainly make a legitimate populist argument that the founders either A, got it wrong, or that B, times have changed. That's a legitimate argument. It strikes me as a very convenient one that the New York Times all of a sudden has decided that now is the time to make it, now that Donald Trump has won. And I just see it as part of a larger theme that I'm seeing that ties back into the conversation we're having.
Well, there's no doubt that the people who are losing in the current system dramatically, you
Right.
have a country that is, based on the popular vote, slightly more left than right, and is getting nothing, not even getting barely a smidge of power out of the deal. That's not how the founders intended it.
But it sounds like you're conceding that the New York Times is on the side of the Democratic Party.
Well, it's a liberal editorial board. I mean, there's no question about that.
Okay. I agree, but shouldn't there at least be the facade that they're not, that they're
No,
unbiased?
it's an editorial board. It's not the reporting staff. The editorial board is allowed to have clear opinion. I mean, that's what every editorial board does. But clearly the left is very mad about the Electoral College and probably will be for some time, because until the day when the Electoral College flips around to their favor. And then Republicans will complain the Electoral College is unfair. And then the question becomes, will Democrats have a moment of magnanimity and say, okay, we agree, we complained before, let's now join together and abolish it, because that's what mushy-headed, soft, weenie Democrats are likely to do. There's no way you are going to change the Electoral College without Republican help, which is not forthcoming. So it's not a very useful expenditure of Democratic or liberal energy to focus on that, because that is not going to happen.
Well, and I think
how to win these states back.
I think the interesting and potentially scary question is, what if this is the new normal? Like you've already said, it's happened twice out of the last, 5 elections. What if this, becomes the norm? What if we just assume that Republicans win the presidency but lose the popular vote in perpetuity? Like that would certainly be not terribly healthy for representative, democracy.
Well, look, people die every year. You got about 10 million people that die every 4 years.
Well, we've got that.
Older folks are dying. Population shifts are towards the southeast and southwest and the far west. The country's always changing, and I don't want to. I don't want to take it so far as to presume that Democrats are going to have this in the bag. But it's not absurd.
Granted, I hear your point, but maybe in perpetuity is the wrong way of putting it. It's not absurd to think this could happen exactly the same way in 2020. That we could have the exact same.
Well, sure. I think 2020, it's not unusual to have a similar election 4 years after the last one.
Yeah. But that would, I don't think, has it ever happened where we've had 2 consecutive elections where a political party has lost the popular vote but won the presidency?
So this is the 5th time it's happened altogether. The first 3 times the president either lost re-election or did not run for re-election. The only time the popular vote loser won re-election was George Bush, and in that case, he won the popular vote. But it's theoretically possible you could get the same result twice in a row. If you got it once, you can get it again. But in 2024, the electoral votes are going to be recalculated based on the census. So you're going to have some population shift away from the north towards the south. Now, that doesn't automatically benefit Democrats because Trump won some of these southern states. Yep. But if what I'm saying earlier was true and that Democrats are on a good track in Arizona, Georgia, Florida, Texas, maybe even North Carolina, that's general shift.
That's going to be the real big story in the long run. Is can Republicans hold Texas? Texas is the whole ball of wax. I mean, if you start off losing Texas, New York, and California, then it's game over.
The Texas electorate is less than 60% white today. And it's also,
but John Cornyn won. John Cornyn won the Hispanic vote, in 2014. So
against a very weak opponent.
Yeah, and when I say won, he didn't get the majority vote, but he got more than his opponent. But if Texas Latinos vote the way California Latinos vote, then that would be very bad for Republicans in the long run, and that could happen if word gets out that Republicans don't like them, and that's what I was warning about in my book. Available now, so not too late to order for Christmas. I think you could probably get a rush order from Amazon.com. It's called Too Dumb to Fail. I'm assuming everyone watching has it already, but it's good for gifts too.
I mean, it's obviously not credible to make certain predictions for 8-12 years from now when you don't know how is Trump going to perform.
Anything could happen.
What's that?
Right? Yeah, totally. Anything could happen. We have who would have thought we'd be here?
Sure. I mean, who would have thought Reagan would win 49 states after beating Carter in 1980, which was a close race until the very end? Who would have thought Reagan would win 49 states after the 82 recession and after what happened in Lebanon?
Who would have thought Barack Hussein Obama would be the nominee in 2008 after John Kerry loses in 2004? I mean, that's just 4 years, not even 4 years.
So a lot of things can happen. having said that, considering how yoked the Republican Party now is to Trump, and the bet that they have made on being the anti-immigration party, it would seem very difficult that Republicans would hold on to Texas in 8 years' time, considering the way the demographics are going. I think that I would do a significant lean towards Texas going blue in the relative near future.
The question I have, though, is can a political party turn on a dime? And I think parties can change much more rapidly than they used to. In other words, the fear of Donald Trump is that he redefines what it means to be a Republican, and that brand is tarnished for a generation. And I think that's the way the world used to work, but it's possible that Republicans milk the Donald Trump thing and get all the working class white votes in the Rust Belt until it doesn't work anymore. And then they become the party of George P. Bush and basically disown Trumpism the way Trump has disowned George W. Bushism. Like, isn't it plausible that maybe Republicans lose one election and then just rebrand and come back, and you can't attack George P. Bush I'm just using him as an example, but whoever the new standard bearer is, that it doesn't stick to him, just like attacks on Donald Trump about George W. Bush's adventurism won't stick.
I agree completely. And I mean, if not George P. Bush, which as folks may know is not just a Bush, but Hispanic and in Texas. But look, if Trump is a total disaster, Marco Rubio could run out of him in the primary in 2020 and remake the party. So sure, there's lots of things that could happen. But if I was a Republican, I would be very nervous at the direction Texas might go in without thinking about how to make some recalibrations down the line.
And I'd like you to think of this very special episode as not a look back at the year that was 2016, but really a look forward into 2017, into the new year, and into this brave new world. Because that's basically what this show's been.
We're coming up to an hour, so we should probably wrap things up. But any final thoughts on what has been a delightful and surprising 2016?
Well, it's been, just yesterday we had at least 3 horrific events, right? I mean, one of them captured on video the assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey. We obviously had the tragedy at that Christmas market in Berlin, and so it's been a tough. I mean, it's been a tough year. Hasn't been a lot to be happy about, but I do feel. I mean, in all honesty, I think America, as you know, Bill, as President Obama has talked about, like, things are much better off, much better than maybe we dwell on the negative, but Americans have enjoyed mostly peace and prosperity compared to other times in history. I'm going to be thankful for that. I am thankful and feel privileged to get to do what I do, which is to talk and write about politics, which is amazing and a blessing to get to do that for a living. So, and I love the DMZ, and it's been, how many years we've been doing this now?
I just crunched those numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but I think we're since I've been doing it longer than you. I think I'm at 10 years.
It's been a while. I forgot to tweet out that anniversary we just met. It was some anniversary.
But I've tried a whole bunch of anniversary dates. I think we will tweet them over the course of the year. So if you want to know your DMZ anniversary dates, subscribe to the DMZ Show Twitter account, which you haven't already.
And I need to put them in my calendar so I know what day to tweet these. Anyway, that's for our big staff meeting, end of year staff meeting, when we parcel out responsibilities. And I'm not looking forward to it. I hear that the bosses are unhappy with some of the comments that we made this year, and some of the tweets that we sent that were clearly inappropriate. So I feel like our Christmas bonus, our Hanukkah bonus, may be paltry this year.
But that's how we live, Matt. We live on the edge. We don't care what the man has to say.
Damn the man. I'm not wearing a necktie. Take that, Suits.
Well, it's been despite all of the horribleness that we've had to suffer, my time with you, Matt, in 2016 has always been a delight, and I look forward to more wonderful conversations in 2017.
Awesome. Well, thank you all as well, the viewers, the listeners of this show, for supporting us and for watching and listening to us and tweeting us. And God bless. And I don't know if we're going to be. We'll have to talk offline to see if this is in fact our final episode of the year, or if we'll come back with a bonus episode. But either way, it's been awesome, and we look forward to keeping this up, keeping the pirate ship afloat in 2017 and in perpetuity, as they say.
All right. Always good to talk to you, Matt. And if I don't catch you next week, I'll catch you next year.
All right. Thanks.